welcome to Marginalia, where we discuss the impacts of literature and how it can shape our lives. In this episode, we're going to be talking about The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, originally published in 1939. But first, as always, let's talk more about the author. So, John Steinbeck was born in 1902 in Salinas, California, and grew up surrounded by fertile agricultural land, which profoundly influenced his work. He attended Stanford University intermittently but never graduated, choosing instead to write and work in various manual labor jobs that connected him to the struggles of the working class. And his upbringing in California's farming communities and his firsthand exposure to the hardships of migrant workers during the Great Depression deeply shaped The Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck's writing often captures the tension between economic despair and the human spirit, with The Grapes of Wrath standing as a seminal piece of protest literature. This novel combines social realism with a deep concern for justice, portraying the resilience of families like the Joads amidst systematic inequality. Now, on to the book we go. Set during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, The Grapes of Wrath chronicles the journey of the Joad family as they are forced off their Oklahoma farm due to environmental devastation and economic hardship. They head west to California in search of a better life, only to find exploitation, poverty, and broken promises. The central characters include Tom Joad, recently released from prison, Ma Joad, the family's matriarch and moral compass, Jim Casey, a former preacher who questions traditional religion in favor of collective human goodness, and Rose of Sharon, whose character arc poignantly symbolizes hope and renewal. The book alternates between chapters focused on the Joad family's journey and symbolic chapters that provide a broader social and historical context, making the struggles of one family a microcosm of a nationwide crisis. And before we get into the analysis part, I just want to say that this book has been known as a classic in American literature, and after reading it, I can tell why. I mean, the symbolic nature that Steinbeck writes with is just so sensational to read. All right, now let's talk about analysis. And in this episode, I'm going to do something a little bit different from before, where I'm going to split the analysis into two parts. One part is rather broad, and the other, in this case, is going to be the biblical symbolism of this book. First, let's talk broad analysis. The novel critiques the exploitative capitalist system that displaces and dehumanizes migrant workers. Steinbeck highlights this through recurring symbols like the turtle in chapter 3, if you notice that, whose slow, determined journey mirrors the resilience of the oppressed. And along with turtles, I believe Steinbeck also incorporates other animals as reflections of the human characters in the book, and that sends a symbol of how the dehumanization and the degradation isn't just apparent within humans, but within animal hierarchies as well. The Joad's journey west symbolizes the hope for a better future, yet California, often portrayed as a promised land, turns into a site of disillusionment. The novel emphasizes the contrast between the desperate migrants and the wealthy landowners, exposing the systematic inequalities of the time. And even though the main character of this book is Tom Joad, Ma Joad emerges as the heart of the novel, embodying the theme of unity and survival, which is pivotal in the Joad's journey to California. Her famous line, and I quote, "We're the people, we go on," end quote, encapsulates the resilience of the working class. Meanwhile, Tom Joad's character evolution, culminating in his decision to fight for social justice, is inspired by fellow Jim Casey's teachings and sacrifices, echoing a call to collective action. The ending, where Rose of Sharon nurses a starving man with her breast milk, is one of the most memorable and controversial scenes in American literature. It symbolizes humanity's capacity for compassion and renewal, even in the face of immense suffering. Similarly, the biblical symbolism of this book is so rich. Let's get started. So the Jodes family's migration to California parallels the biblical Exodus, with their journey echoing the Israelites' search for the promised land. However, Steinbeck subverts the promise of salvation, portraying California not as a land of hope, but as a corrupted Eden, consumed by greed and inequality. Biblical symbolism enriches the narrative's social and spiritual dimensions, with the landowners and exploitative forces evoking a modern day Babylon that oppresses the vulnerable. California, initially envisioned as a paradise, becomes a site of suffering, highlighting the moral decay of a society that prioritizes wealth over human dignity. Steinbeck contrasts the biblical ideal of a just and bountiful promised land with the harsh realities of economic exploitation, underscoring themes of disillusionment and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systemic injustice. Now, I never realized this when I read the book, Grapes of Wrath. I never tied it to the Israelite search, but I did read some analysis of the doc that serve as secondary sources that do talk about the Garden of Eden and how the migrants' journey to California portrays that. And so I wanted to learn more about this idea. That's when this all came up. And I just think if I dig even deeper, there's going to be so much more information about it. And that's what makes Steinbeck's writing so, so unique and deep. Furthermore, the novel's title derives from the biblical concept of the grapes of wrath, notably in Revelation, symbolizing divine judgment and eventual reckoning. This imagery reflects the growing unrest among oppressed workers at the time, likened to a holy wrath against exploitative systems. Casey, a Christ-like figure, embodies self-sacrifice and moral awakening, offering a critique of organized religion while advocating for collective justice. His death, analogous to Christ's crucifixion, catalyzes the workers' resolve, highlighting themes of resilience and redemption. And Jim Casey is a character that we will see repeatedly, his importance to the novel and how he contributes to the story's deeper symbolism, like we've talked about, and his parallel to Jesus Christ. And through these symbols, Steinbeck weaves a narrative that calls for empathy and social change, linking the plight of migrant laborers to universal themes of suffering, hope, and resistance. This goes beyond the novel because during the time of when Steinbeck wrote this book, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl were happening. So by calling out for hope and resistance, Steinbeck highlights the resilience and unity of the marginalized people. And through the Jode family's journey, he emphasizes the importance of collective action, as seen in a moment where the migrant workers working together to face exploitation from the police. And Steinbeck's use of intercalary chapters broadens this narrative, showing the widespread struggles of the oppressed while reinforcing the potential for change. And his portrayal of dignity amidst suffering serves as a rallying cry during these hardships. Now, back to the book, we're going to continue more on Jim Casey's character. So, as we all know, he's a pivotal character in this book and is also Steinbeck's embodiment of a modern Christ figure. And his initials, JC, directly mirrors Jesus Christ, and his arc from wandering preacher to self-sacrificial leader reflects biblical parallels. And while I read the book, I found it extremely clever how Steinbeck used the initials of Jim Casey as Jesus Christ, and I even tried to see if any of the other characters had this kind of symbolic allusions, but I did not find any. Jim Casey's the only significant one. Furthermore, Casey rejects traditional religious structures, claiming, and I quote, "There ain't no sin and there ain't no virtue. There's just stuff people do," end quote. This aligns with his belief in collective human goodness and the power of unity, rather than using divine judgment, which he had used previously in his life. And Casey's transformation begins with his introspection and rejection of institutional religion, evolving into a moral leader who stands up for oppressed migrant workers. His death at the hands of police during a labor protest mirrors Christ's crucifixion, dying for the greater good. His final words were, "You don't know what you're doing," echoing Christ's plea for forgiveness for his persecutors, symbolizing redemption and the birth of a movement. Furthermore, Jim Casey's role in The Grapes of Wrath is central to Steinbeck's exploration of human suffering, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption. As a Christ figure, Casey mirrors Jesus not only in his initials, obviously, but also in his philosophical evolution and ultimate martyr. Formerly a preacher, Casey abandons traditional religion, recognizing the limitations of organized faith to address human suffering. Instead, he embraces a broader spiritual philosophy, emphasizing collective human experience and the interconnectedness of all people, not only the rich, but also the poor. His statement that maybe all men got one big soul everybody's a part of encapsulates his belief in unity and shared humanity. Now I'm going to highlight a few specific moments in the book when Casey's life parallels with Jesus Christ. First is the wilderness reflection, and just as Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness contemplating his mission, Casey spends time wondering and reflecting on his purpose, ultimately choosing to advocate for social justice rather than traditional salvation. Second, teachings and sacrifice. Like Christ, Casey gathers followers and spreads his vision of a better world through unity and collective action. His decision to intervene in labor disputes leads to his death, a sacrificial act that mirrors Christ's crucifixion. And lastly, death as catalyst. During the last moments in his life, Jim Casey resonated with Jesus' plea for forgiveness on the cross, and his death galvanized Tom Joad to take up his cause, much as Christ's death inspired his disciples. Even though Jim Casey has a pivotal role in this book, so do the other characters, especially our main character, Tom Joad, who begins The Grapes of Wrath as a self-focused individual fresh out of prison, initially concerned only with his family's survival, which is typical at the time due to the Dust Bowl and the migration happening. But however, his encounter with Casey profoundly changes him. Inspired by Casey's philosophy of unity and social justice, Tom evolves into a leader who embraces collective action as well. After Casey's murder, Tom takes up his cause, embodying his vision for justice, solidarity. His iconic line, "I'll be everywhere, wherever you look," symbolizes his transformation into a transcendent figure, resonating with Christ-like omnipresence and hope for the oppressed. Along with Casey, they both illustrate the novel's central message: salvation lies within. Secondly, Ma Joad serves as the emotional and moral anchor of the family. Her resilience and adaptability shine as she steps into a leadership role amidst the family's turmoil. Now, Ma is a typical female character, but unlike the traditional gender norms at the time, she comes up as the head of the family during these hard times by embodying strength and unity. Her unwavering hope and refusal to falter keep the family together, making her a symbol of moral courage and endurance. Third, Rose of Sharon. She undergoes one of the most just unique and profound transformations in the novel. Initially, she was self-centered and preoccupied with her personal struggles, with her husband and all the teenage romance, but she matures through her hardships. Her climax act of breastfeeding a starving man in the final scene symbolizes renewal and shared humanity. This act of sacrifice and sustenance echoes biblical themes, likening her to the Madonna, and serves as a powerful representation of grace and hope in the face of despair. Next, Pa Joad. Pa Joad begins as the family's patriarch, but his role diminishes as the hardships of migration erode his ability to lead. And that's when Majo takes over. This shift highlights the changing family dynamics under crisis, and Pa's struggles reflect the broader displacement of traditional roles and the challenges of maintaining authority in a rapidly changing world. And lastly, a relative of the family, Uncle John, haunted by guilt over his wife's death, symbolizes the destructive power of unresolved grief. His decision to place Rose Sharon's stillborn baby in the flood waters parallels the biblical story of Moses, transforming personal tragedy into a symbolic act of protest. This moment underscores the novel's theme of finding meaning and resistance in the face of suffering, and it's also the most important scene that depicts how the current crisis may affect the future because of Rose Sharon's stillborn. Let's jump to the literary context of this book now. And just as we talked about last time with the Scarlet Letter, The Grapes of Wrath is closely associated with realism and naturalism, literary movements prevalent in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These movements emphasize detailed, unflinching depictions of everyday life and human struggles, as realism depicts, and often explores the impact of environment, social economic conditions, and heredity on individuals and communities. Some examples of realism in The Grapes of Wrath focuses on portraying life as it is without romanticization or idealism. Steinbeck's depiction of the Joad family's journey exemplifies this movement through its vivid and gritty portrayal of the Dust Bowl era migration, poverty, and systemic oppression. Because during the time, I believe a lot of the families, or most of the families, undergo what the Joad family has, and Steinbeck portrays this as realistic as possible. And the novel also sheds light on the lived realities of the Great Depression, presenting the Joads not as extraordinary individuals, but as representatives of the broader migrant experience. Through characters like Ma Joad and Tom Joad, Steinbeck captures the resilience and humanity of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Now, naturalism, a subset of realism, emphasizes the influence of environment, biology, and social conditions on human behavior. Steinbeck's portrayal of the migrants as products of their harsh circumstances aligns with naturalist principles. The novel highlights the powerlessness of individuals and even animals, as we see in the interluding chapters, against larger forces such as industrial capitalism, environmental catastrophe, and societal injustice from the police, who were bribed by the rich. The Joads struggle for survival amidst the mechanization of agriculture and corporate greed underscores how external forces shape their fate. For example, the main reason that the Joads had to leave Oklahoma in the first place was because of mechanical, industrialized farming techniques and robots that started taking over the farmers' work. So they were forced off of their homes because everything needed to be reconstructed. All of the farming land had to be destroyed. Even though naturalist works often employ a detached scientific tone, Steinbeck combines this approach with profound empathy. For instance, Jim Casey's philosophy that humans are part of a bigger collective echoes naturalism's focus on human interconnectedness and the deterministic forces shaping life. The novel's ending emphasizes the naturalist themes of survival and the continuity of life, despite overwhelming odds. Additionally, this novel also aligns with social realism, a movement dedicated to critiquing societal structures and advocating for change. Steinbeck's critique of capitalism, exploitation, and inequality situates The Grapes of Wrath within this tradition. The text functions as a call to action, urging readers to confront systemic injustice and emphasize with the plight of the disfranchised. These movements collectively shape the novel's tone, structure, and themes, situating it as a cornerstone of classic American literature that continues to resonate as a social and political critique. Ultimately, The Grapes of Wrath is a searing critique of economic inequality and a celebration of the resilience and humanity of the oppressed. Its themes remain deeply relevant, resonating with modern discussions about income disparity, climate change, and, of course, social justice. I would say that Steinbeck's novel begins quite slowly due to its immersive imagery and background information on the setting. However, as the book progresses, the reasons for Steinbeck's success in literature becomes apparent, with symbols and their hidden analysis, which made reading really exhilarating because of the mind-blowing figurative languages that Steinbeck includes. Overall, I would give The Grapes of Wrath an 8.5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this book, I recommend Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, another exploration of friendship and survival during the time of the Great Depression. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Marginalia. Until next time, happy reading.